Very much, and thank you for calling this hearing. I want to go first to Mr. Hicks, the chair of the Election Assistance Commission. As you know, I represent the 8th Congressional District in Maryland proudly. Your offices happen to be in my district, so I follow your work closely. In Maryland, we were notified just a couple of weeks ago by the FBI that the private vendor that our state uses for purposes of election administration management of our voter registration database has close ties to a Russian oligarch connected to Vladimir Putin. This bizarre revelation, perhaps a coincidence, perhaps not, has raised profound questions about the potential for interference in our elections by compromised private election vendors due to the extraordinary lack of regulation on how election vendors do their business. So I wanted to ask you several questions about this to see how far this problem may indeed go. After this revelation about ties to a Russian oligarch of our election vendor in Maryland, has there been any way for you to determine what other states may be using this vendor or other vendors who have ties to Vladimir Putin and his oligarchs?
That's an ongoing investigation, and the EAC does not have the wherewithal to comment on that right now. I would defer to my colleague at DHS to talk a little bit more about that.
Well, okay, I don't have too much time, but Mr. Krebs, let me ask you, is there an ongoing investigation at the Department of Homeland Security about whether there's some kind of systematic plot by Russia to exercise influence over private election vendors?
So we are looking in specific to the Maryland case, and thank you for your letter on that front. This is actually one of those stories of progress. When the State Board of Election in Maryland was notified that there was a connection, they immediately reached out to us and asked for help, and we have deployed that assistance. So we are making progress here. Again, those relationships did not exist a year ago.
Okay, I mean, forgive me for my sense of urgency, but we have an election in, I think it's 107 days, maybe it's 108 days at this point. It is right around the corner, and so it doesn't give me a lot of comfort to learn that there's progress being made. So have you determined that there are any other states whose election vendors have been compromised by connections to Russian oligarchs or Vladimir Putin?
This is a broader supply chain conversation. We do know that in the case of Maryland, that there, at least according to the information I've seen, there was no ability to influence based on that venture capital firm. But we are conducting a broader assessment of the risk environment.
When do you expect to have the results of this investigation, this ongoing investigation?
I assume that this investigation, because of the nature of procurement cycles, will be ongoing and, frankly, will never end. As we develop more information, we'll act on it.
Okay, but Mr. Krebs, forgive me. Are there states who have election vendors today that are running elections in November who have ties to Russian oligarchs or the Putin government?
Sir, at this point, I don't have information to share on that.
Is there anyone at the Department of Homeland Security who does have that information?
Sir, I do not. I'd have to defer actually to the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Okay. Is there anyone in the panel who knows how many states are currently contracting with private election vendors who are using foreign-made parts or foreign software in their election day products? No one can tell us. Okay. Mr. Hicks, back to you.
This is a broader...
I got you. I got you. Are vendors currently required by Federal law to adhere to cybersecurity best practices or to report to the EAC in the event that there's some breach of cybersecurity?
No.
Are vendors uniformly required to report any cyber threats to you?
Uniformly, no, because it's a voluntary system.
All right. As I thought, I thank you all for your answers, but they demonstrate why I've introduced H.R. 6435, the Election Vendor Security Act of 2018, which requires election vendors to be owned and controlled only by citizens or permanent residents of the United States, to adhere to cybersecurity best practices, and to report all known or suspected cybersecurity breaches or threats to State and Federal authorities immediately. I would urge all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle in this committee to join me in this effort to protect the integrity of our election processes in 2018. This is something that needs to be done right now. and this is not something that can be put off to another day. It's not something that can be postponed, and we cannot be satisfied with vague promises of ongoing progress and investigation. This is a democratic emergency. The elections go right to the heart of democratic self-government in our country. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.